Welcome to Spotlight Murder by Skoob, and I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell. In the summer of 1989, Hollywood was buzzing with possibility. A young actress named Rebecca Lucille Schaeffer was on the verge of something extraordinary. At just 21 years old, she had already captured the hearts of millions as Patricia Patty Russell on the hit CBS sitcom My Sister Sam. But Rebecca's story begins far from the glitz and glamour of Tinseltown. Born in Eugene, Oregon, and raised in Portland, Rebecca was the only child of a writer and a child psychologist. Picture this: an honor student who spent her evenings writing poetry and deeply exploring her Jewish faith. She was so spiritually inclined that she initially dreamed of becoming a rabbi. Can you imagine? The girl who would become America's sweetheart once considered a life devoted entirely to religious service. But fate had different plans. Rebecca's natural beauty and magnetic presence caught the attention of modeling scouts while she was still in high school. By 16, this small-town girl had made the bold leap to New York City, signing with elite model management. It was a decision that would change everything. Her transition from model to actress seemed effortless. In 1985, she landed her first notable role on the daytime soap opera One Life to Live. But it was her casting as Patty Russell on My Sister Sam in 1986 that truly launched her into stardom. Starring alongside Pam Dauber, Rebecca brought a fresh, energetic presence to television that resonated with audiences across America. Those who worked with her described Rebecca as more than just another pretty face. She was intelligent, ambitious, and incredibly focused on her craft. After My Sister Sam was canceled in 1988, she made a calculated decision to pursue film roles that would establish her as a serious actress, moving beyond the lightweight comedy that had made her famous. Her dedication was paying off. She starred in the 1989 comedy Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills and had taken on a role in The End of Innocence. But the role that could have changed everything was within her grasp. She had just auditioned for Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 3 the day before her death. Imagine that moment of anticipation, knowing that your big break into serious dramatic work might be just around the corner. Pam Dauber, her co-star and mentor, would later say of Rebecca, "She was smart, she was funny, she was beautiful, she was grounded." The executive producer of My Sister Sam, Diane English, captured her essence perfectly. She was the essence of goodness. But unbeknownst to Rebecca, her success had attracted the attention of someone whose obsession would ultimately destroy everything she had worked for. 3,000 miles away from Hollywood's bright lights, in Tucson, Arizona, a troubled young man was living in a fantasy world centered entirely around Rebecca Schaeffer. His name was Robert Bardo, and his story is a chilling reminder of how mental illness, when left untreated and unchecked, can spiral into something truly dangerous. Born on January 2nd, 1970, at Edwards Air Force Base in California, Robert was the youngest of 7 children. His mother was Japanese, his father a U.S. Air Force non-commissioned officer. The military life meant constant moves, constant upheaval, until the family finally settled in Tucson in 1983. But Robert's childhood was far from stable. He faced emotional and behavioral difficulties from an early age, experiencing abuse from one of his siblings. The trauma was so severe that he was placed in foster care after threatening suicide. School became impossible. He struggled academically and dropped out in the 9th grade, eventually working as a janitor at a fast food restaurant. A diagnosis of bipolar disorder led to brief periods of institutional care, but the damage was done. Robert had never learned to form healthy relationships or manage his emotions. What's particularly chilling is that even before Rebecca Schaeffer entered his life, Robert had already demonstrated a dangerous pattern of stalking behavior. During the 1980s, he became fixated on Samantha Smith, the young peace activist who had gained fame for corresponding with Soviet leaders as a child. Robert actually attempted to travel to Maine to find her, but was arrested on the way and sent home. When Smith tragically died in a plane crash in 1985, Robert simply shifted his obsession to pop singer Debbie Gibson, traveling to New York to pursue her. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was calculated, planned, persistent. Even when faced with legal consequences, Robert wouldn't give up. In his personal writings, he revealed his mindset with a chilling phrase, "I don't lose, period." This wasn't just determination. This was an inability to accept limits, boundaries, or the word no. Then, sometime in 1986, Robert discovered My Sister Sam. And Rebecca Schaeffer became his new obsession. What Robert Bardo saw when he watched My Sister Sam wasn't Rebecca Schaeffer, the actress. It was Patty Russell, the innocent character she portrayed. In his troubled mind, Rebecca became a goddess, a perfect, untouchable figure of purity. Listen to how he described his feelings. "She came into my life at the right moment. She was brilliant, pretty, outrageous. Her innocence impressed me. She turned into a goddess for me, an idol. Since then, I turned into an atheist. I only adored her." Think about the implications of those words. Robert had literally replaced religious faith with worship of a television character. He couldn't distinguish between Rebecca the person and Patty the character. In his mind, Rebecca Schaeffer was obligated to remain the innocent, pure figure he saw on his TV screen. For 3 years, from 1986 to 1989, Robert lived in this delusion. He wrote letters to Rebecca, sent gifts, and in 1987, made 2 trips to the Warner Brothers studio lot in Los Angeles, hoping to meet her in person. On his first visit, he carried a teddy bear and flowers, the gifts of an admirer. But when security turned him away, something darker emerged. He returned a month later, this time carrying a knife. Security stopped him again, but the escalation was clear. Robert was becoming more dangerous, more desperate. His fantasy relationship with Rebecca was being challenged by reality, and he couldn't handle it. But it was in 1989 that Robert's delusion completely shattered. He went to see Rebecca's latest film, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, expecting to see his pure, innocent goddess on the big screen. Instead, he watched Rebecca in an adult role, appearing in a romantic scene with another actor. The reaction was explosive. In Robert's twisted mind, Rebecca had betrayed him. She had destroyed the perfect image he had created. She was no longer pure, no longer worthy of worship. Instead, she had become something that needed to be punished. Clinical police and forensic psychologist Dr. Chris Mahandy later explained Robert's mindset. He began telling himself that he was going to punish you and permanently possess you by taking your life. Murder, in Robert's deranged thinking, was a way to take permanent control of the perfect image he believed Rebecca should have maintained. In a disturbing letter to his sister, Robert revealed the depth of his obsession. "I have an obsession with the unattainable, and I have to eliminate what I cannot attain." But perhaps most chilling was the religious justification he created for his planned violence. He later told a court-appointed psychiatrist that, if she was a whore, God was going to appoint me to punish her. Robert had given himself divine permission to commit murder. Now, all he needed was a way to find Rebecca Schaeffer's home address. Here's where our story takes a turn that highlights a dangerous flaw in the system, a flaw that, tragically, still exists in many forms today. Robert Bardo needed Rebecca Schaeffer's home address, and in 1989, getting that information was easier than you might think. Robert had learned about the case of actress Teresa Saldana, who had been stabbed by a stalker in 1982. That stalker had used a private investigator to obtain Saldana's home address, and Robert decided to use the exact same method. From his home in Tucson, Arizona, Robert hired a detective agency and paid them $250 to find Rebecca's confidential Los Angeles address. Today, that might seem like a significant amount of money for someone working as a janitor, but for Robert, it was an investment in his obsession. The detective agency found Rebecca's address using records from the California Department of Motor Vehicles. This wasn't some elaborate hack or illegal break-in. At that time, private citizens and investigators could legally access personal information, including home addresses, from state DMV records. It was a massive privacy loophole that put every celebrity, and really every citizen, at risk. Think about that for a moment. All it took was $250 and a phone call to a private detective, and a dangerous stalker had the home address of his victim. No background check on Robert, no verification of why he needed this information, no protection for Rebecca, despite her celebrity status. With Rebecca's address in hand, Robert began planning his final trip to Los Angeles. But he wasn't taking any chances. When he arrived in West Hollywood, he didn't go straight to her apartment building. Instead, he roamed the neighborhood, showing Rebecca's photo to strangers and asking if she really lived at that specific address. Can you imagine being one of those people? A stranger approaches you on the street, shows you a photo of a TV actress, and asks if she lives nearby. It probably seemed harmless, maybe just an overeager fan hoping for an autograph. How could anyone know they were helping a stalker confirm his victim's location? Once Robert was certain he had the right address, he made his move. On July 18, 1989, he rang Rebecca Schaeffer's doorbell. She answered, expecting a script delivery for her audition. Instead, she came face to face with the man who had been obsessing over her for 3 years. July 18, 1989, started like any other day for Rebecca Schaeffer. She was focused on her career, preparing for what could have been the audition of a lifetime. The day before, she had auditioned for a role in Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 3, a chance to work with one of cinema's greatest directors and transition into serious dramatic roles. She was expecting a courier to deliver a script, so when her doorbell rang that morning, Rebecca didn't hesitate to answer. But instead of a delivery person, she found herself facing Robert Bardo. The initial encounter was brief and, on the surface, relatively normal. Robert showed Rebecca a letter and autograph she had sent him in response to his fan mail, proof of their relationship in his mind. They had a short conversation, but Rebecca focused on her upcoming commitments and, probably sensing something unsettling about this unexpected visitor, asked Robert not to come back to her home. For most people, that would have been the end of it. A polite but firm boundary had been set, but Robert Bardo was not most people. After being dismissed, Robert went to a nearby diner, but instead of accepting Rebecca's reasonable request, he became furious. The conversation hadn't been the romantic, special encounter he had imagined. In his fantasy, Rebecca would have recognized him, welcomed him, maybe even invited him in. The reality, a brief, polite interaction, followed by a request for privacy, shattered his delusion. Combined with his existing rage over her role in Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, this rejection pushed Robert to the point of no return. He had traveled from Arizona with a handgun, and now he was going to use it. Robert returned to Rebecca's apartment building and rang the buzzer again. Rebecca, understandably irritated that he had returned after she had specifically asked him not to, answered the door a second time. According to Robert's later testimony to a psychiatrist, she looked at him with a cold look on her face and told him he was wasting her time. That final rejection was all it took. Robert quickly pulled out the handgun he had been hiding behind his back, a detail that would later prove crucial in court, as it demonstrated premeditation and what the law calls lying in wait. At point-blank range, in the doorway of her apartment building, Robert shot Rebecca Schaeffer in the chest. As she collapsed, Robert later claimed the actress repeated the words, "Why? Why?" It's a question that echoes through this entire tragic story. Why did a talented young woman have to die because she chose to play different roles as an actress? Why was a troubled young man able to access her private address so easily? Why couldn't the system intervene before obsession became murder? Rebecca was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but the damage was too severe. She was pronounced dead approximately 30 minutes after her arrival. Robert ran from the scene, throwing away the murder weapon and other items as he fled. The next day, he was arrested in his hometown of Tucson, Arizona, after motorists reported a man acting erratically in traffic. The brief, violent intersection of two lives was over, but the impact would last for decades. The investigation into Rebecca Schaeffer's murder moved quickly. Robert Bardo had left a clear trail of evidence: his diary, letters, the private detective he had hired, and his own erratic behavior after the crime. As one officer involved in the case later said, "We had clear evidence that he had been following her, sending letters, and trying to contact her for months." When the case went to trial, Robert's defense team faced an uphill battle. They attempted to argue that he was not fully responsible for his actions due to his mental health problems. The defense presented evidence of his childhood trauma, his bipolar disorder diagnosis, and his history of emotional instability. Psychiatric testimony described Robert as someone who struggles to control impulses and has obsessive tendencies that interfere with judgment. But the prosecution had a compelling counter-argument. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of mental breakdown. This was premeditated murder. Robert had planned his actions meticulously, hiring a private detective, traveling from Arizona, bringing a weapon, and returning to Rebecca's apartment after the first encounter didn't go as he had fantasized. One prosecutor stated, "Bardo knew exactly what he was doing. He followed her, planned each step, and pursued his goal without hesitation." The jury was shown evidence that Robert's actions were calculated and deliberate, demonstrating clear intent to harm. The detail about Robert hiding the gun behind his back proved particularly damaging. This wasn't a confrontation that escalated. This was an ambush, legally classified as lying in wait, which elevated the charges and demonstrated premeditation. Robert Bardo was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized both the seriousness of the crime and the ongoing danger Robert posed to society. This was a planned act that caused the tragic death of a young woman. The sentence reflects both justice for the victim and protection for the public. Throughout the trial and in subsequent appeals, Robert remained largely silent and detached. Reports described him as calm and emotionless, which experts interpreted as part of his obsessive and controlling personality. As one psychologist noted, people who engage in this level of obsession and planning are often not deterred by legal consequences because their thinking is rigid and fantasy-driven. Robert's appeals were consistently denied. His legal team continued to argue that his mental health issues should have prevented him from receiving such a harsh sentence, but the courts maintained that his psychological problems did not eliminate his criminal responsibility. Rebecca Schaeffer's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. This wasn't just another tragic crime. This was a wake-up call about the very real dangers faced by public figures from obsessive fans. But more importantly, it was a catalyst for change. Rebecca's family and friends were determined that her death would not be in vain. They worked tirelessly to push for legal reforms that would protect others from similar tragedies. Their efforts led directly to the passing of the California stalking law, also known as Penal Code Section 646.9 in 1990. This might not sound revolutionary today, but it was groundbreaking at the time. Before this law, stalking was not a specific crime in California. Law enforcement's only option was to charge suspects with harassment, which was often inadequate for addressing the escalating behavior that typically precedes violence. The new stalking law made it easier for authorities to intervene and protect potential victims before violence occurred. It recognized that there's a pattern to obsessive behavior. It starts with letters and gifts, escalates to showing up at workplaces or homes, and can ultimately lead to violence. By criminalizing the earlier stages of this behavior, the law created opportunities for intervention before it was too late. But the impact went beyond California. Rebecca's case became a template for stalking legislation across the United States. Today, all 50 states have anti-stalking laws, and many of them were modeled on the legislation that emerged from her tragic death. The case also highlighted the dangerous privacy loopholes that had made Rebecca vulnerable. The ease with which Robert obtained her home address through DMV records sparked discussions about public access to personal information. While progress has been slow and inconsistent, there have been improvements in protecting the personal information of both celebrities and private citizens. Rebecca's story became one of the first widely publicized examples of celebrity stalking, helping to raise awareness about the psychological profiles of dangerous fans. It contributed to better security protocols for entertainers and improved threat assessment procedures for law enforcement. Rebecca Schaeffer wasn't just a victim. She was a rising star with a rare mix of talent, kindness, and grounded ambition. At just 21, she had already made the leap from small-town Oregon to hit TV shows and major film auditions. Those who knew her described her as the essence of goodness, someone destined for a long, bright future. But her story didn't end the way it should have, and what happened next changed far more than Hollywood. New laws, new protections, and an entire national conversation began because of her case. Yet there's still one part of her story most people have never heard, one detail that reshaped everything. If you want to hear that missing piece, download the Skoob app now to get access to the full story. Explore the complete episode, bonus content, and more.